Okay, so I wanted to talk about this story about Germany's election because I'd already spoken about it exclusively for patrons, but some developments have taken place since that video, and I thought it might be a good thing to try it on the community tab to give a little explanation of what's been going on. I haven't seen a lot of Anglophone news or Anglophone channels speaking about the German election, and it's really interesting. There is one YouTuber who did take the time to talk about it. Really interesting guy, Rubos. I'm going to link to his channel if I think of it. Rewboss. Basically, what took place on September 24th of 2017 is that Germany had a general election, and Angela Merkel, who's been in power for a very long time, actually lost some of her seats in the Bundestag. In fact, the two largest parties in Germany, Angela Merkel's CDU and Martin Schulz, who was the leader of SPD, those were the two largest parties, and they both lost some of their vote shares. The CDU, 8.6% of the vote, and therefore losing 65 seats in the Bundestag, in the German parliament. The SPD lost 5.2% of their vote share and 40 seats in the Bundestag. Now, these were the two parties that were working together in the German Bundestag. Angela Merkel, since the 2013 election, she won 41% of the vote, but as she did not have a straight majority in the Bundestag, she was forced to make a coalition with the SPD. That would be the Social Democratic Party of Germany. And those two parties were in coalition together for the last 5 years. Political scientist, not a mathematician. So if those two parties were the two kind of losers in the election, who were the winners? And what kind of consequences does that have for Germany? Well, one of the big winners was a newcomer to the political arena in Germany, the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany. They won 94 seats in the Bundestag and 12.6% of the vote. So they're the third largest party. We'll come back to AfD. The three other smaller parties were also kind of the winners. Basically, for big parties, this election was bad. For smaller parties, this election was good. The FDP, the Freie Demokratische Partei Deutschlands, the Free Democratic Party, which is a bit of a laissez-faire capitalism party focused on business. So they're looking for less government regulation in business and more pro-business policies. The Green Party, which is clearly a left-wing party that's looking for environmental regulation. And then the actual Die Linke, the left party, as you might imagine, that would be a leftist party that is... well, I don't know exactly if their vote share changed. Let me take a look real quick. Actually, it did go up a little bit, 0.6%, but they earned 69 seats in the Bundestag, 9.2%. So smaller parties did really well. The two bigger parties did really bad. Let me tell you why that's resulted in a bit of a crisis for Germany's politics. Angela Merkel didn't have enough to form a coalition. She didn't have that in 2013 either. But the SPD, the second largest party, was in coalition with her. They were willing to form a coalition. Not this time around. Maybe. Martin Schulz, the leader of the SPD, after the election and before the election, indicated that he was not interested in forming a coalition with Angela Merkel again. It's been seen as bad for the party overall. The party, as part of being associated with a center-right party like CDU, they ended up losing and doing poorly in this election. And I think part of that was probably because their members saw them as being too cozied up to Angela Merkel when they, now are going to be in the opposition where they want to be, where they can actually, sell their own agenda and not have to, be a part of a larger governing coalition. So they indicated after the election they weren't interested in being with Angela Merkel in CDU or as part of a CDU coalition. So what that meant was that Angela Merkel needed to go to find two smaller parties in order to form another coalition. So she went to the FDP, the Freie Demokratische Partei, and she went to the Green Party. And those three parties went into talks together. Now, there was already going to be a big challenge because you're talking about taking a center-right party, CDU, which is actually I guess you call it a conglomerate or an amalgamation party. There's another smaller party, a regional party, the CSU, within CDU. It's a Bavarian party that's a little bit more right-wing than the CDU, which is a national party. Stay with me here. So you had Angela Merkel's center-right party. Then you had the FDP, a little bit further to, I'll do it to your right here on the camera, a little bit, the FDP, which was, laissez-faire capitalism. Then you had the Greens, which are looking for environmental regulations and probably additional government spending. What you had was a recipe for not a coalition. It was going to be tough to thread that needle between really four parties. So what happened? Well, the talks broke down about a week and a half ago. And so that was the moment when a lot of media said, well, this is a crisis. Germany has been the stable democratic leader, really, in the center of Europe, an economic powerhouse now, in a moment of crisis for Europe, a moment of challenge at the very least for Europe. I guess not everything is a crisis, but it kind of feels like that this year. With Brexit talks going on, Germany, the alliance between Germany and France standing up for a unified Europe was kind of the key to their negotiating position and continues to be. Additionally, with Southern European debt and general lack of prosperity, large unemployment numbers, the European Union was relying on Germany and specifically really on Angela Merkel to be strong and stable, if I can use that word now, or those two words now. Theresa May in the UK ran on strong and stable in the last election, and that didn't go over well for her, but that's what Angela Merkel represented to the Germans and really to Europe as a whole. Is just love her or hate her, she was there, and she was a known quantity in the center of Europe. And so that was kind of thrown into question, and it still is in question as of the making of this video. What's changed since the last time I made the video, speaking exclusively to my patrons, is that now the SPD has decided, you know what, we will talk with Angela Merkel. Perhaps we'll have another grand coalition of the two largest parties. But it's not going to be easy. At least that's how the SPD is selling this. They're saying, we're going to talk, but we're not going to make it easy on you. And I think one of the biggest sticking points is going to be between actually the CSU, this regional party that's part of CDU, that definitely is looking to, well, let me tell you what the SPD wants. The SPD wants to let expire a ban on allowing migrants to bring their families into the country. Beforehand, for the last, I guess, year or so, since the refugee crisis started in Germany, people who registered themselves as asylum seekers weren't able to bring their families into the country. And the SPD happens to think that at least their official position is that unified parties are a critical portion of assimilation. And if we're talking about migrants who are here to stay, they need to bring their families in. Now, that does not come off the right way to CDU and CSU, which are two, this conglomerate party, which is kind of lurching a bit to the right now. CSU does not want that to expire. In fact, they want it to extend. They want that ban to extend. And so if we imagine what's going on behind the negotiating doors of this new coalition, that's definitely going to be an issue. Spending will also be an issue. Germany has a bit of a budget surplus, which I know is like an unheard of thing in governing. Germany has a surplus. And so they've been talking about whether, okay, do we want to invest this in new programs? Are we going to save this money and pay down, national debt? How are we going to use it? And the SPD will probably have some conditions upon which the coalition will rest. Now, should those talks fall through, then we go back to the fallback of a bit of a crisis. So Germany has a system that is hard. In Spain, in 2015 and 2016, there was an electoral crisis there. Their larger party, the Partido Popular, could not form a coalition, and so there was a new election. And it's super easy to call a new election. The king in Spain just says, all right, there's another election. The parliament's gone now. Los diputados go a casa. And in Germany, it's not so easy. In Germany, you have to go through a series of no confidence votes. So in the German Bundestag, which then chooses a chancellor, the president nominates a chancellor. Then there's a vote. If they get the majority of the vote in the Bundestag, then that person becomes chancellor. Easy peasy, especially if there's a coalition, right? That's how it's worked for decades now. However, if that doesn't happen to be the case, there's a second stage of voting where they try to get a majority. If that doesn't work, there's a third stage where it's kind of up or down. This is from my remembering and my reading. If at that point one candidate for chancellor doesn't get a majority, it's incumbent upon the president, who's more of a figurehead in Germany, to decide should there be a minority government or should there be new elections called. Now, the reason that the president has this power, at least what I was reading in the Washington Post and the New York Times, was that this is a reaction to Germany's past, to Adolf Hitler. Hitler was chosen to be chancellor because of the kind of political tumult that went along with calling new elections. There were a few, I think, in 1933 that brought him to power. And eventually President Hindenburg at the time acquiesced to von Papen, and there's a backstory there. But basically, the fascists, the Third Reich, the National Socialists came to power on the backs of a new election, a series of new elections, and therefore Germany's a little bit hesitant to call new elections. At least that's what I'm reading in New York Times and Washington Post. I was going to make a full video on this, but I haven't been able to independently verify that information. I was looking around to try to find some sort of primary source document that said, we put this stipulation in the new German Grundgesetz because the new German Constitution, because of Adolf Hitler. I haven't been able to find that direct connection, but logically it does make sense that the Germans would be hesitant to call new elections. One extra factor I wanted to talk about, and the one that I kind of put off there, AfD, this Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, is a populist nationalist right-wing party, which oddly enough has strong roots in East Germany, which is, former, arm of, or like part of the communist bloc. And it really makes you wonder about the places where the far right and the far left meet. Because you have a bunch of people that lived under Soviet rule, now presumably, at least part of them voting for this far-right party, this populist nationalist party. It's interesting. You wonder if it's like a longing for the old days or a desire to get as far away from the old days as possible. I'll let you debate that. When I actually visited the Bundestag. I was lucky enough to go there last year. And when our tour guide took us into the chamber of the Bundestag, he said, they're going to have to change this layout when the elections happen, because this new party is going to win, and they're going to have to figure out where in the Bundestag they're going to sit. German politics are changing. World politics feel like they're changing right now. And this place that was very stable, Germany, has at least shivered a bit. And the question is, are they going to, Angela Merkel and SPD, that is, are those two parties, CDU and SPD, going to form a coalition for the time being in order to see Brexit through, to see Europe through this difficult time? Literally, when I was listening to some of the talking heads on German television, they were saying Donald Trump is another big reason why there's a likely coalition, because the politicians in Berlin right now just see the world as, there's just too much tumult. I've used that word twice now. There's just too much going on in the world right now to not have a stable Germany. It's ironic considering history. It's interesting to watch, and I really encourage you, if this is interesting to you, I'm going to leave a few links below. Der Spiegel International is an English language version of the German newspaper, national newspaper. Let me know down in the comments if you have an opinion about this, or if maybe I've gotten something wrong, or if there's something else you want to know, or something I haven't explained so well. I'm going to leave it there. Let me know if you like this on the community tab, and I'll talk to you soon. Later, guys.